Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We're currently in Module 10, and this lesson, we're going to answer the question, what should be in my portfolio? So we talked last time about work experience, and the idea that you can get work experience without having a job. But when you're applying for a job, you want to have a portfolio. This is different than your resume or CV. Instead, what it is a body of work. And this is kind of your proof of who you are as a developer. And so there's different pieces you can put into this, but this is what you give to probably not the HR person. So there's two different types of people that will probably interview you for a programming job. One is the human resources person. And this is the person who does not know what you're going to do, at least not understand it in depth usually. Instead, they know to check certain boxes. Yes, this person has the education we're looking for. Yes, they have the work experience we're looking for. Yes, they seem like a decent human being. This is usually the first check you go through that just makes sure that you check all the boxes that a regular person, a non-developer, would understand. And so it's the filtering process. And that person just needs to know that you roughly fit the shape of what they're looking for a developer. Okay, you roughly have the experiences you need and the training you need and all the rest. The next level typically is when you talk to a person who understands development. And this is where a portfolio comes into play, because they're going to ask you questions. They're going to talk you through what the position is and what they're looking for, and ask you questions about your skill levels. And this is where it starts to get a little tricky. One of the things that is common, that's not a great practice, but it's very common in the industry, is some type of testing. Whether it's you stand in front of a whiteboard, or they just ask you questions, or they give you a little assignment to do. It's not always the greatest practice because of the fact that maybe you don't do well in front of a whiteboard. Maybe that's not how you normally develop, which it probably isn't. You probably develop in Visual Studio with the internet, and you Google questions you don't have answers to. This is one of the ways to shortcut sometimes the urge for people to put you in front of a whiteboard, or to think that your whiteboard work represents who you are. Because you can point to this and say, well, yeah, maybe I didn't do the greatest in the whiteboard, but here's how I do my work. Or maybe it even stops them from sending you to the whiteboard because they can see your work. So a portfolio can be very, very important. So let's talk through, what would you put in a portfolio? Now, the first thing I want to stress here is, often when people hear portfolio, they get stuck on the idea of, how would I present this? Is it a web page? What template should I use? Is it, what all the ways of laying it out? That's not nearly as important as actually having the content. So focus on the content first. I'm not going to tell you which template to use, web template to use. I'm not going to tell you how to lay this out, because that's up to you. You get to choose that, because that's really not nearly as important as what goes into it. Not nearly by far. So let's talk about what goes into a good portfolio. Number one, this is product show. Off source code. So that's usually proprietary, but you can talk about what you built. I built this application. Here's what it did. Here's how it affected our user base. Okay, so It made us more efficient. It reduced the need for 100 people to do this job. Now, if you're talking about your personal work, your portfolio, your open source work, or something like that, then you point to actual source code and say, I built this, and this is what it does. This is my product showcase. All right? And the key things here, do not be verbose, meaning do not have portfolios. They're not going to take the time. I know from experience they're not going to take the time. And so instead, what you need to do is make it as brief as possible and as pointed as possible. So highlight the impact, because that's what software development is all about, is the impact. If your application maintained the status quo, that's not that great. But if you had some type of impact, highlight it, which is the number of users that use it, duration of use, how long has it been in production. Maybe one of the really big ones is if a process took a long So do whatever you can, bullet points, small little bullet points that tell why your application was important. It's not just its code, it's not just that it's cool. What did it do? Highlight that in small bullet points and have a very brief paragraph that talks about what your application is. Try for about 2 to 3 sentences. That's it. Not compound sentences, shorter sentences. Okay? 2 to 3. All right. And then also highlight what challenges you overcame. This usually what I do is I have a brief paragraph that talks about the application. I have a list of bullet points that talks about the benefits the application provided. And then I have another brief paragraph that talks about the challenges I had to overcome. I may even put in a bullet point list again. Bullet points are easy to scan. Lost. And so if I had a list down below of challenges, I might say things like, I worked on an application back in 2000, and wireless technology was just coming out. It wasn't very great. There wasn't a lot of applications that used it, and we had to do something where we controlled conveyor systems using wireless technology and PDAs. This is really cutting edge stuff, and a lot of the manufacturers hadn't even gotten out an application to do this yet. Belts with AO211B. Wireless access to conveyor belt with compact, I think it's what they call it, IPACs. Those little PDAs, you probably don't remember anymore. It's, again, 20 years ago. But we did all of that, and so I'd highlight the big challenges we overcame. Built wireless software that no one in the industry is using yet. Okay? Just highlights the challenges you overcame so that you can show off just how revolutionary what your work did was. Now, maybe it's not massively revolutionary. Maybe it's just small things. Identified how to send email to an entire list without getting caught in spam filters, or improved how fast the emails could go out. There's a fine line between your list of your impact and your benefits, or challenges to overcome. But try and put your tech fixes, or your the important thing to do with the technology, into your challenges to overcome. Because that again highlights your doing the interviewer, and it elevates your status as a developer because you did something that they went, how would I do that? Okay, and it makes them think. All right, so that's your product showcase. Next is your open source contributions. Now, if you don't have any, first of all, maybe you should get some, but also you can skip this section. But identify the key projects you contribute to. Now, it sounds an awful lot like the last lesson. We talked about building a product. We talked about open source contributions. But this is a bit different. This is how you highlight that work. Yes, that work is work experience. And yes, you can share that as work experience. But here's where you highlight that work and say, this is what I did. Okay? So you highlight what projects you work on. Again, we're talking about kind of name dropping a little bit, saying, I worked on the Dapper project, or I worked on .NET Core, or I worked on ASP.NET Core. Okay? That's a little bit of name dropping, but it's a little bit of, these are the things I've been working on. Okay? What your contributions have been. So link to the pull requests. Say, here's the pull requests that I've done. Now, don't point to pull requests that are semicolon fixes. Okay, so you fix a semicolon and you contribute that. That's not exactly awesome. But if you have a little method that you created that maybe improves performance of the application, highlight that. Point out that commit and say, this method right here, that fixed performance by 5%. Again, you're highlighting what it did, and you're showing a code of what you did to do that. All right? And then discuss the value of the overall project. So you are part of a larger team. Okay, when you contribute to open source, and it's not just your project, you're contributing to a larger team. You're part of that team now, and you can talk about the mission of the team. And since you're a part of that, you get some of those benefits along with it. Now, you can't claim credit for the whole team. You can't say, oh, I contributed to Dapper, therefore, I built Dapper, or this is what I have done when you're talking about the team has done. You can't do that. Help move a team from .NET Framework to .NET Core. I helped, and you can list those things, and this will show your involvement, and it will more closely associate you with that overall work. All right. Now, if you have your own open source project, that's great. Highlight what it does. Show the whole thing. Point to the mission of the application. Who uses it? How many? So that's open source contributions. This final one is one that people often don't have. And it's really a shame, because often when people are learning C#, and you never stop learning C#, so don't think that you're done at some point. But when people are learning C#, they often do so in a haphazard manner. They learn something over here, they get distracted, learn something over there. You go in front of an employer, you say, yep, I'm still learning C#, or yep, I've been growing in C#, but you have nothing to back it up. And you go, oh, well, I learned about tuples the other day. That's kind of all you got, which is cool. I mean, you learn about tuples. Excellent. But that's not exactly showing progress. If instead you come to a prospective employer and you say, here is my reading list, here's my learning list, and okay, I've got 50 things on this list and I keep adding more every day, and I'm on number 38. That shows progress. They can look through those and go, that's good to know, that's good to know. Wow, you learned about that? I haven't even learned about that yet. What's that like? And then also, since again you should be practicing what you learn, you could attach your test projects, your learning projects to each of those steps. Maybe create a GitHub repository where you have labeled 1 through 50 folders, and each topic and here's the direction I'm going. Here's what I've covered. Here's where I'm going. That shows growth. That shows that I am making an effort. I'm investing in my own skills. I have a plan. I am executing that plan, and I know what I'm doing. That really shows that you are someone that they want to hire. That initiative, that drive, I want to hire that all day long. Because if you do that on your own, imagine what you do when you have some of my resources behind you. And so you make yourself look a whole lot better. Again, don't fake this. Don't pretend, because that will be found out at some point, and that won't be good. But be genuine. Create a learning path for yourself, and then follow that learning path. Document what you've learned. Maybe even but if you blog about what you're learning, then you also have some growth in the community. People start to recognize your name. And now you can again point in your portfolio to say, hey, I've written this code, I've documented what I've learned, and I had 10,000 people last month look at my content and learn from what I'm learning. And so I'm bringing people along with me. So documenting your learning path, whether it's just a GitHub repository or it's a blog or however you do it, if you document it, it will help. You can ask the hiring manager, you can ask them, is there something that you think I'm missing on this list? Is there something that you think that I should be covering that maybe I don't have on here yet? And where do you think that should go? That gets them invested in helping you, and you could say, oh, I have covered that. I just didn't put in a list. Here's what I did. Or the practice projects I did for that. Or here's the test project I did building Razor pages. And then it fills in having to be sneaky about it. You figured out what they think your gaps are. And if you have filled that gap already, you can communicate that. And if you haven't, you go, I really appreciate it. I'm going to put that in a list right here. And you put in a list right in front of them, and then say, I'm going to learn that on this date, or I'm going to learn that in the next 2 weeks or the next month. And by communicating that, you have shown that you will follow their lead, that you appreciate their advice, you listen to their advice and you act upon it. Now you've demonstrated that you would be a good follower for them. You'd be someone that would your learning path, really important. So the pro tip for today, quality is most important. Don't put junk in your portfolio. Don't put bad content there. Don't just fill it up with useless stuff. Now, I did talk about your learning path, and I did talk about the idea of putting your test projects there. Talk through those test projects. We've talked about how to build a test project and how your first one should be very basic. And your next one should kind of touch on some of the edges. And the third one should touch on the but they have a purpose. And you communicate that purpose, and that's fine. That's not what I'm talking about here about quality. What I'm talking about is if you built an open source project and you just threw a whole bunch of code at the problem, it's really ugly, it's really messy, and it doesn't really do a job, but it's out there. Don't put that in your resume. Clean it up a bit first. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. Document. Here's all the things I want to fix in this project. And talk about the idea that I have projects out there that are half built, where they run, but they're not great. And so I have a running list. These are the things that I want to address. I know these are problems, but I wanted to get this working out the door. And so it's the shortcuts I made, and here's how I want to go back and fix those shortcuts. That still shows quality. But don't just have a whole bunch of hacks put together and say, there you go, blah. Clean it up a bit. So quality is most important. And that's more important than quantity, but both are best. So don't cut your portfolio down to one thing because that's the only quality thing you've done. Put more than that in there. And that might mean you have to do more work. Go back to last lesson and talk about work experience and do some of that work. But that will build up work for your portfolio. And make sure you put quality stuff in there. Okay? If you worked on a project where the end result is they fired you because you weren't producing good enough work, don't put that in your portfolio. That wasn't a good example. Put something else instead. All right? So that's your pro tip for today. Quality is more important than quantity, but both are best. All right, your homework. Start compiling your portfolio. Don't worry about the layout right now. Focus on the content. Okay? Identify what pieces you want to add to your portfolio and make a plan for how to do that. I do work on each one to highlight the benefits, to talk through the challenges, and to very briefly explain what you did. You need to do some work on each piece. So it's not just I've got 5 things to show, blah. Here's my 5 repositories. Highlight, point out, identify code snippets or work you can point to. All right? So do that work and start compiling a portfolio now. All right? Then once you started that, once you got a portfolio design started and you know what to do, then move on to the next video. But if you don't have that portfolio full yet, identify what pieces you should add to it. Go back to the previous lesson where we talked about work experience. Pick one of those things and have it add to that portfolio for you. Okay? So do that work and then come back for the next lesson.